Welcome to the Long Only Podcast. I'm Doug.
I'm Gerry.
Gerry, I'm not going to
Doug?
ask how you're doing today because we both have colds.
Yes, it's probably more evident with me than you, but hopefully I don't sneeze and cough and whatever.
Both of us are trying to tough it out because
We're in
it's,
different rooms and the microphone apparently doesn't get sick. So
yeah, well, and we're at work. It's not that, as far as colds go, it's not that bad. It's just annoying.
no, I feel fine. It's annoying.
Yeah. So
Totally annoying.
I'm just hoping this resets. As I said yesterday at lunch, I'm just kind of hoping this resets the button so I don't have to worry about getting sick for another, 3-6 months, something like that.
All
I was
building
due.
antibodies.
Yep, exactly. Well, today we're going to start with something ripped straight from the headlines. We talked about it before we made the migration to video. This is a probably a little known case for most Americans, but it's now drifted up into the Supreme Court, and this has been on the horizon for a while. But the Supreme Court finally is making some movements on a doctrine known as the Chevron Deference, and this has big impacts for business and governance. So, Gerry, what's going on? What is the Chevron Deference?
So this goes back to a 1983 case. Chevron is the Natural Resources Defense Council, which, if you recall, at the time it was Reagan era. At the time, this particular group, Natural Resources Defense Council, was trying to push for more, I guess you'd say, stringent, regulation of what was considered to be polluters at the time. Chevron, I guess, being one of them, and without getting into the great details of jurisprudence on this particular case, what it did was it gave the court sided with the National Resource Defense Council in this case, and it gave more, shall we say, power to the administrative state. So it wasn't just, in this case, the EPA would have been the what would we say, have the jurisdiction over environmental matters as it relates to Chevron. But this case was used then over the ensuing, now where are we, 40 years. 40 years. 40 years. Got my math right. It's been used over and over again to argue for why the administrative state has the ability to make rules, if you will, because the case, I think the simplest way to explain it, allowed for what in fact, I think the terminology was even reasonable, quote unquote, leeway, for whatever better word, there's probably a better word, for the bureaucratic state or for administrative agencies to have reasonable jurisdiction over making rules. Well, therein lies the problem. They've taken that term reasonable and they've run it into 40 years later, where I would argue Congress in many cases are absolutely abdicating the responsibility of making rules and laws even, and they've turned it over so much to the administrative state that the administrative state has run amok. Well, there's now a case before the Supreme Court that is trying to undo that and say, no, wait a minute, laws and rules and what have you are needed to be put in place by legislatures, by Congress. So this is a classic case of you open the door a little bit in probably what at the time was considered to be a reasonable decision, that over the course of 40 years is part of the reason why we have such an incredible amount of bureaucratic creep. It's not bureaucratic creep anymore. It's bureaucratic tsunami. The bureaucratic state has grown so large, and this is, we've talked about this over and over again, and it's why we get so, animated about the growth of government and the size of government. We're witnessing with what's happened with bureaucracies and the administrative state, putting regulations that are just so onerous, especially affecting small business, that we look to a case like this, and I'm trying to recall the name of the case. It doesn't matter. It's called the Chevron Deference case now. Well, that by the way was the
Isn't it Natural Resources Defense Council versus Chevron.
That was the Chevron deference case. So now what the case is, I can't remember.
This current case, sorry.
Who versus who on this particular one? That's before the Supreme Court. And from arguments in the case, it sounds like the Supreme Court is leaning towards overturning this Chevron deference case, and which will have significant implications for. It's the fishing industry. The fishing industry, I believe, is the one that's at issue with this particular case that's outstanding. But anyway, it's almost irrelevant. What's more important is the actual, what it sets as precedents, or what it undoes. With respect to just how much regulation. And we've talked about, when you go back to the 8,000 to 4,000 problem, the number of public companies that we've shrunk to in the last 20 some odd years, we believe that's very significantly tied to regulations like Sarbanes-Oxley, even the NASDAQ settlement that took place over NASDAQ, the spreads in NASDAQ securities, and how much market makers make on making markets in small NASDAQ traded securities, to Dodd-Frank, to the alphabet soup, I would say, of various regulatory regimes that have come into place, almost always in the wake of excuse me, in the wake of some crisis. It's an attempt to always solve problems that are avoid. We'll never have this happen again, and it ends up opening up Pandora's box, and the next thing you know, you've got the law of unintended consequences 40 years later, and we've let the administrative state run amok. So as believers in free enterprise and promoters of small business, and being a small business ourselves, we're very much looking forward to possibly getting this overruled. Now, of course, the other side is, oh my gosh, now you're going to have massive pollution, and the rivers are going to be dirty, and the ocean's going to be a mess, and the air horrible.
Pardon me.
Who wants to breathe bad air? Okay.
Where's the mute button?
What's that?
Where's the mute button? I just sneezed. Sorry.
Excuse me. Excuse you. Anyway, so that's one to keep an eye on.
So I would add a few things to this. Number one, Justice Jackson recused herself from the case because she was involved. She was on a 3-judge panel on the D.C. Circuit that heard arguments on a related case. But she has raised concerns that ending the Chevron deference would give the courts too much power and lead judges to engage in policymaking. Wow, it sounds like a very unusual criticism comes from her side of the political aisle.
Exactly.
And also, I would say that, look, I was 8 in 1983. I know that probably every claim that the Reagan administration made in the name of the EPA might not have made sense and been wise stewardship of our resources. I'm not going to stand behind every decision they made. But I would also say that even more current iterations of the EPA have not demonstrated a lot of competence. We've got a case where this impacted a family member of mine very directly. But in 2015, in Colorado, the EPA released a bunch of toxic waste into the Animas River, and with the Gold King mine disaster. That was just a complete fiasco. And then you have the case of John Beale, who was the EPA agent who claimed to be a CIA spy and defrauded the government out of about $900,000. So, I mean, the EPA, and obviously these are anecdotal, but the EPA is part and parcel a classic example of a government agency that just has given too much power. And this is the administrative state that Trump was largely elected the first time to try to dismantle, and was largely unsuccessful in doing so.
Well, and I think it's, I noticed it, interestingly, Paul Clement is the lawyer that's arguing for the fishing industry, the herring fishermen. I think his quotes are are worthwhile. He's basically saying that the current system means that Congress never has to weigh in and reach a compromise on the toughest policy questions, because one side or the other can just wait for a change in the executive branch every 4 or 8 years, and the rules will swing back and forth based on the views of the political party in power. That gets to my point of Congress has abdicated responsibility for making laws. They have to do that's what Congress is supposed to do. They're supposed to debate. They're supposed to, put forth, potential laws, possible laws, debate them, come to a conclusion, vote on them, and then that's it. And he's hitting the nail on the head here. And I think, frankly, this should go beyond politics. Either side should be frustrated with this, because we have a system in place where these issues get solved and laws are made based on compromise and give and take and the debate that goes on in Congress. Unfortunately, Congress has given up debating. I think I really do. I think let's put forth this idea in the form of a law, and let's debate on it on both sides, and let's just see where we come to a conclusion in our vote. The politics will still obviously come into it. Whoever controls may well win that particular argument depending on which side they come down on. But that's what the system is supposed to do. It's not supposed to be a bunch of unelected bureaucrats making rules that are like Mr. Clement is claiming is flowing back and forth every 4 to 8 years based on who's running that bureaucratic state. So I think regardless of which side of the political spectrum you come on, you shouldn't like that. That shouldn't be elections determine what the people want, and then the people's representatives go battle out what they're going to make laws, and then that's it. And then the administrative state should be nothing more than just carrying out what the laws are that the Congress passes. I mean, is there anybody that really thinks that's controversial?
Yes,
I know there are, and that's part of the problem we have today for sure. That's why things can be construed as being a real mess, but that's what our country is. That's what it was built on. That's what's made it great. We better start paying attention to these kinds of things. And this case is potentially a huge, step in the right direction. I think, as Clement says, I can't think of a better way to mark the 40th anniversary of the Chevron decision than with an overruling. In our view, this has really gotten out of control, and that's the point. It's not that one side or the other will say, "Oh," and in this case, it's the left that's against this. And I'm not sure what that says about the left, because I do think this should be politically agnostic. They obviously have gotten quite good at using the administrative state to their benefit. Well, okay, so sorry, but that's not the way our system is supposed to work. You got to go out and prove to the people what you want, get elected, and then you can put laws in place that you win the vote on in Congress, and the rest of us just have to live with it.
Well, and even if you think that too much power is resting in the judges' hands, and you think that judges aren't accountable enough, because some appointments obviously are for significant periods of time, if not for life, in the case of the Supreme Court in particular, there's more accountability there than there is in nameless bureaucrats. As we saw during recent hot button cases, if people don't like what the Supreme Court's saying, they'll show up at their houses, breaking federal law, mind you, to do so. But they will. Those judges do have to answer it to a way that any bureaucrat who's making law on the fly won't have to do. And there is a place. There's always gray areas. There's a place for judges to interpret laws. There's a place for Congress to make the laws. But in nowhere in the intent of our system were nameless bureaucrats supposed to be the ones making policy.
It's very simple. Congress makes laws. The agencies, as organized by the executive, the president, carry out the laws, if you will. And the judge and the judicial branch interprets laws when there's a dispute. Simple.
Well, that's going to close down the Chevron deference segment of today's show. And we're going to move on to an investing topic. This one should be evergreen, because we're going to talk about two things Gerry looks for in a good investment. That's it. 2. That's it. Not 3, not 4. I asked him to think of 4. He was like, I can't think of 4. I've only got 2 qualities I'm looking for. You get these right, and you have a good chance for success. Nothing is certain, and obviously, if you aren't patient enough and your time frame is too short, then you're really getting into dicey areas. But Gerry, we got 2 items that we're looking for investment success, qualities in a good company. What are they?
Well-managed companies in front of fertile fields of growth.
That's it. Okay, segment's done.
Number 2. All right. The hard part is where you try and figure out what those are.
Yes.
Who are those well-managed companies, and are they in front of fertile fields of future growth?
Well, first of all, maybe we can start with the well-managed companies. Well, maybe good management is like good acting. It's tough to define, but bad acting when you see it. So
that's a good one. I'm not sure I would hang my hat completely on that by any means. That may be a good place to start.
Yeah, but
because we certainly know. Unfortunately, a lot of times it's after the fact. And as Dick Taylor used to say, my mentor, it's part of the reason we own 40, 50 companies.
Oh, can I finish this? Show I listen.
Say again. I'm sorry.
Can I finish this? Because that's to show I listen to my friend and employer. It's because you never know when someone's lying to you.
Exactly. Yeah, so you got it. So, but the better that you get at looking into people's eyes and trying to determine whether they're honorable people, and that's really what we're looking for when we're making investments. And some of the greatest venture capital investors I've ever come across have said they know within 5 minutes whether they're going to give a company money based on the people that they're talking to, and that's really amazing. And so it tells me that the great successful venture investors have been able to determine someone's validity as a manager really quickly. I think that's generally the case, but I'm not willing to quite go that far, because I think, especially when you're talking on venture capital side of it, which we've been on, of course, as you know, sometimes you get these entrepreneurs that are, I hate not to offend anybody, but they might be a little bit geeky, and it's a little hard to tell. They're brilliant, and it's a little hard to tell necessarily right off the bat. Especially in the startup world, I don't want to sell somebody short because they may not be the greatest, most polished, most savvy communicator, because sometimes they're the most brilliant people. Now, often those people will, if they're very smart, will find a partner that can communicate really well. And oftentimes that's from the business side of the equation. And usually are good communicators, honorable people, that whole thing. Those are that's a bit of advice to young entrepreneurs getting started that are brilliant technicians, but may not be the greatest communicators in the world. Find somebody that you trust, that is honorable, that is a good person, that knows business, understands their way around a balance sheet and income statement, and can help you. But we digress. Well-managed companies, the character is number one. Absolutely. I mean, what most problems you have, if somebody's going to lie to you, obviously they're of low character. Your ability to be able to look into somebody's eyes as a manager and kind of sense, is this somebody that I feel I can trust, that's telling me straight? That's an art that not everybody has, but it's not something that you can teach. It's just a feel. And I think that's, again, like I said, the great venture investors will have said, they know in 5 minutes. I would say that's probably true of most investors, successful investors who do evaluate for long-term investment. And I mean long-term, 10, 20 years is short-term, long-term is much longer. You just start to develop the ability to say, that this is a real guy, or what, I don't trust this guy, and there's sliminess here that usually I feel like I can pick that out right away, and we've become more adept at over the decades. So yeah, well-managed companies.
Well, something I would say to that also is, it's not just that they'll lie to you. If you catch them lying to someone else, they're going to lie to you too. So
Oh, of course.
Don't fall for that trick. It's only a matter of time.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So well-managed companies. Is there any other technical aspect you can think of management that really matters? Obviously, the character is one thing.
Into the equation, because you can have somebody that's just a really good guy, but is incompetent in the sense, they don't know how to run the nuts and bolts. Most public company, I mean, by the time somebody gets to the point where they're running a public company, they're pretty adept at the competency of running the nuts and bolts and sort of the technical side of being a manager. And I think that, frankly, people that are adept at that are not that hard to find. And generally speaking, well, I just said, you can have somebody that's of high character, they're a good person, but they're just not very, they're not particularly good at managing the nuts and bolts. Most often, though, again, when you find somebody that has the motivation to want to be in business and they're of high quality character, they're probably pretty sharp people that are also competent in running in the nuts and bolts side of it. At least that's been my experience. Now, there have been times, and this is not to say that you have to be, and I think this is really important, you don't have to be buddies with these guys, right? I mean, and I want to be careful about, that it's all a litmus test of, hey, this is a guy I want to go have a beer with or whatever. No, but it should be a guy that you say, this is the guy I want running my company, or a gal, just to be 21st century. But I think that is an important point to make, that you can have somebody that, maybe their, their interests are different from a personal standpoint, or they're just personally not, this is not a guy I'm going to go out and play golf with necessarily, but that doesn't mean they're not excellent managers. So you have to go in there not with the idea that I'm going to try and make friends with this guy. You have to go in there with the idea of what's your criteria? What are you looking for to measure character? What are you looking for to measure, technical capability? And I don't mean technical like the technician that is necessarily the inventor. Although with smaller companies, that's often the same. And when you get the unusual circumstance, and they're out there, where they're a particularly strong technician from like the engineering standpoint, if you will, and they're the innovator, and they're also a high character and good at nuts and bolts business, that's a great combination, and not common, frankly. And in fact, again, as you get to be a public company and beyond, like even a seasoned public company, more so a seasoned public company, again, you're generally going to have people that are nuts and bolts okay. Now I also want to mention that when you're talking about management, another thing that we take and this is a company, it's private and public company, but more so public. We want to know who's on the board and what they're all about and where they come from, and do we know them? Do we know people that know them? Do we, because they're the ones that are making the decision. They're the closest to the company, and they're the ones that are making decisions on management. The CEO is hired by the board, and fired by the board. There's multiple aspects. That's why, I say, what are 4 things? When you ask me the question, I say, well, 4 things. Well, I probably have 400 things, but they all stem from those first 2 well-managed companies, fertile fields of future growth. And
worst YouTube video title of all time: the 400 things you need for investment success.
Exactly. So it's much easier to break it down to 2. I would say we probably needed a separate podcast to do fertile fields of growth, because that's in and of itself, it's a whole podcast. So we should come back to that.
We will come back to it.
I gave you the answers, the two things, and we touched on. It took us a podcast to do one. We'll do another podcast that's the second part of that.
Got you. Well, with fertile fields of future growth, you're talking about basically the potential of the market, though, right? I mean, that's the concept. We're going to have to get into it.
We got deeper into that.
Yep.
That gets into narratives and all of that.
All right. Jerry's got a lunch. He's going to try to save the state of Arizona. So we're going to let him go. And in the meantime, please follow us on Instagram, taylorfrigon.invest, and our website, taylorfrigon.com. Of course, you can email the show, long only, at taylorfrigon.com. adherecapital.com. If you have any questions, you want to know about our firm, our fund, please email us, give us a call. Until next week, I'm Doug.
I'm Gerry.
And thanks for joining us on the Long Only Podcast.